Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. If there's one constant in the way Oda builds emotional twists, it's that he loves putting Luffy in dilemmas where he must act not only as a pirate, but as a person, a grandson, a friend, and the force of change he represents. And if we consider how the final arc of One Piece is weaving together the closing lines of multiple stories, it's not unlikely that Garp could end up at the center of one of these moments. From the Vice Admiral's first appearance in Chapter 431, his relationship with Luffy has always balanced humor with dramatic weight. He's the grandfather who punches him for becoming a pirate, yet also the man who, deep down, respects the freedom his grandson chose to follow. What we saw in the Egghead arc and in Chapter 1088 with Garp heading to Hachinosu to save Kobe showed that he's still willing to throw himself into danger for those he loves, even if it means facing the new generation of monsters, in this case, Kuzan and Blackbeard. And that's where Dragon's Peace enters the board. The revolutionary leader has been almost a narrative ghost since his introduction in Chapter 100, always present as a shadow in major events, but rarely acting directly. What little we know of him comes from interactions with Ivankov, Sabo, and more recently, Kuma. But if we pay attention to Oda's narrative patterns, there's a point that seems to be set up for the future, a moment where Dragon and Luffy are forced to interact openly and with a shared objective. So far, Oda has kept them apart, likely to make the impact of this encounter as big as possible. And what better reason to break that barrier than their grandfather? For Dragon, his father; for Luffy, his grandfather, being in imminent danger. The danger, by the way, is already established. In Chapter 1088, we see Garp fighting Kuzan on equal footing, using insanely powerful hockey techniques like the Galaxy Impact. But we also see that he's aging, that injuries are taking their toll, and that even his experience can't completely negate the numerical and strategic advantage of Blackbeard's crew. The manga ends that sequence leaving his fate open, which by Oda's standards is practically a narrative siren saying, this arc isn't over. If Garp is kept as a prisoner or used as bait, the story creates the perfect hook for Dragon to enter the scene, because a rescue of this scale is exactly the type of operation the revolutionaries could carry out. But not alone. It's worth recalling how Dragon operates. Since Chapter 594, when we see the revolutionary headquarters in Baltego, it's clear he's more of a strategist than a frontline soldier. He prefers to move pieces and manipulate events, but when the emotional stakes are high, he can get personally involved. Like the times he indirectly rescued Luffy in the past. In Garp's case, the stakes wouldn't be just strategic, but personal. While the father-son relationship has never been deeply explored, Oda has already shown in Ace's flashback chapters 550-551 that Garp can place family bonds above the rigidity of the Marines, at least to a certain extent. It's plausible that Dragon shares the same contradiction. The theory begins to solidify when we combine this with Luffy's current position in the world. After Wano, Chapter 1053, he's officially recognized as one of the 4 emperors. That means asking for his help wouldn't be seen as dragging in a rookie. He's a political and military force comparable to the very Yonko-threatening Garp. Dragon, who has openly declared war on the world government, could see an advantage in temporarily allying with his son, not only to save the father, but also to create a symbolic impact. 2 of the government's most wanted men acting together to rescue a marine hero. The propaganda effect would be devastating. The question, of course, is how Dragon would approach Luffy to make this request. Dragon's personality, from what we've seen, is far more serious and measured than Luffy's, which could generate interactions that are funny and tense at the same time. And that's where Oda's skill with bridge characters comes in. Ivankov, who interacted with Luffy in Impel Down, chapters 537-538, and is Dragon's right hand, could be sent as a messenger. Another possibility is Sabo himself, whose bond with Luffy is stronger and more immediate. If Sabo appeared with news that Garp is in the hands of Blackbeard or the government, Luffy wouldn't think twice before acting. This would then open the door for a later encounter with Dragon during the operation. There's also a logistical factor that strengthens this theory: location. If Garp was captured in Hachinosu, that puts the rescue in Blackbeard's territory, one of Luffy's main antagonists in the final stretch. In other words, Oda could use this mission as a narrative stepping stone toward the final battle with Teach, starting with a personal goal, saving his grandfather, and escalating toward the inevitable confrontation. Dragon could enter as a support force, bringing not only revolutionary soldiers, but also strategic intelligence on how to infiltrate the enemy base. And we can't forget that in the Egghead arc, chapter 1089 onward, forward, the entire world is already reacting to the simultaneous movements of multiple powers. If Garp's rescue happens in this context, it could overlap with other events, creating that sense of global chaos Oda has been building since the Reverie. This is important because it allows Dragon and Luffy to act together without necessarily compromising their individual journeys. For Luffy, it would be a transitional arc leading to the next island. For Dragon, it would be a calculated... There's also the emotional element, which Oda would certainly explore. Tracer, imagine the weight on Luffy, seeing his grandfather in real danger. Not like at Marineford in chapter 566, where Garp restrained himself out of duty, but as a direct victim of ruthless enemies. Luffy isn't the type to hesitate when someone he loves is in danger. And seeing Dragon mobilize for the same reason could, even briefly, create a tacit bond between father and son. This bond wouldn't need to be melodramatic. Oda could handle it with the series' characteristic humor, with Luffy calling Dragon a serious old man, and Dragon getting annoyed at the lack of formality. But the subtext would be there. At their core, they share the same fire to protect their loved ones. Another point supporting this theory is how much Oda loves to converge narrative lines at key moments. Garp's rescue could be the event that finally brings Luffy, Dragon, Sabo, and possibly even Shanks together, if the red-haired Yonko has any interest in preventing Teach from strengthening his position. Remember, Shanks has already been positioned as an active player in the hunt for Bartolomeo and in the battle for Yonko territories, chapter 1055. It wouldn't be impossible for him to show up to repay the favor of having taken care of Luffy during his childhood, helping to ensure his grandfather's safety. Finally, there's an almost meta-narrative detail. Oda knows the audience has been waiting for Luffy and Dragon to meet for years. He'll likely want it to happen memorably, with high stakes and strong emotional context. A plea for help to save Garp checks all those boxes. It connects generations, brings together characters who rarely share the spotlight, injects action and comedy in the right doses, and advances the larger plot against Blackbeard and the world government. This is exactly the kind of setup Oda has been building since he placed these three men, Garp, Dragon, and Luffy, on opposite sides of the same war. With all these pieces in place, the scenario becomes very clear. Garp in danger serves as a catalyst for an event that, on its own, would justify a mini-arc. Dragon appearing to ask Luffy for help wouldn't just make sense for the story's progression, it would also satisfy a long-standing fan expectation. More importantly, it would open the door for the final stretch of One Piece to be not only about finding the One Piece, but also about reconnecting bonds and resolving family matters that have been in the background since the very beginning of the journey. If we accept that Dragon asking Luffy for help to save Garp is the narrative trigger, the next inevitable question is, how would Oda execute this operation without disrupting the main story's flow while still maximizing impact? The first thing to consider is that Oda likes to overlap events to create a tension mosaic. See Marineford, chapters 550 by 380, where Ace's fight wasn't just about him, but about all the factions and ideologies clashing on that battlefield. In Garp's case, the stage could very well be Hachinosu, since Blackbeard has established his base there, but with a crucial difference. This time, it wouldn't be just a frontal war. Dragon's presence completely changes the dynamic. He's the leader of the world's most secretive and subversive organization, which means the approach wouldn't be storming the harbor with cannons blazing. It would be a calculated plan, with infiltration, distractions, and of course, room for Luffy to mess everything up with his spontaneity, because we know no plan survives the first grin of the Straw Hat. This mix of tactics and chaos is perfect for highlighting the contrast in style between father and son. Dragon trying to coordinate precise movements, while Luffy decides it's time to go across the rooftops because it looks more fun. Sabo's role here would be central. In chapter 1054, we saw that he's considered the Flame Emperor and carries a reputation rivaling Dragon's. He could serve as the link between the revolutionaries and the Straw Hats, explaining the plan and trying to keep things minimally organized. Beyond that, Sabo would have personal motivation to participate. Garp is as much a father figure to him as he is to Luffy, creating a rare emotional cohesion in missions like this. The logistics of the rescue would also need to account for the nature of Blackbeard's base. Hachinosu, as we saw in chapter 957 and more clearly in 1080, is a chaotic mess of pirates, criminals, and henchmen. Entering unnoticed is impossible, but Dragon could turn that chaos into an advantage, infiltrating agents disguised as pirates, spreading rumors to divert attention, maybe even sparking an internal war among the island's factions. This is something the revolutionaries have already shown they can do, like when they manipulated information to destabilize kingdoms under marine control. Luffy and his crew's participation, however, would inevitably lead to direct confrontation, and this is where Oda could use the moment to escalate tension with Blackbeard. Since chapter 441, Teach and Luffy have been built as foils. Both believe in dreams, but take opposite paths, putting them face-to-face during a high-stakes rescue would be a natural step toward their final battle. Even if Teach isn't defeated here, a partial clash, maybe Luffy freeing Garp but having to retreat due to enemy reinforcements, would leave the taste of revenge lingering. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.